Friends, good morning and welcome to another edition of SPTV News Live. Jane Doe number one, who was sexually assaulted by Danny Masterson, also known as Gen B, filed a civil lawsuit in December of 2022 and it became unsealed in June of 2023. And she alleges that Sea Org groomer Gavin Potter sexually assaulted her, and she's currently suing him in a upcoming civil trial, the current leader of the cult, David Miscavige, and the cult of Scientology itself. And what do? As predictably so, they try to derail it in the way of throwing it into religious arbitration. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. This is a typical move that the cult does. They try every tactic and their mother to get something into their hands, into their court, and into their law within a law. And this is typical, but it actually might stand a chance as this has worked in the past. Now we've covered what it was like trying to sue David Miscavige, one of the defendants in this civil suit filed by Jane Doe number one. In this video called Dodgy David Miscavige Denies Being Served in New Danny Masterson Civil Lawsuit. I'll link that in the description box so you can check that out. But this is let's go over the case first, and then we'll discuss their religious arbitration and what the hell's going on here. So specifically, this civil lawsuit alleges that Gavin Potter was assigned by David Miscavige the task of recruiting minor females into the Sea Org, and in particular, a division known as Bridge Publications, which produce Scientology's books. Such young female recruits were known as bridge babes, a phrase invented by David Miscavige, according to the lawsuit. Jane Doe number one was born into Scientology in 1974, and her parents were involved in the Religious Technology Center, also known as RTC, the nominally controlling organization in the Scientology movement and also a named defendant in the suit. Jane Doe number one herself was recruited into the Sea organization, which requires members to sign billion-year contracts when they can barely critically think at 14 years of age. At 16 in 1991, she was assigned to be a receptionist at the L. Ron Hubbard Life Exhibition on Hollywood Boulevard, but she rebelled against it. At that point, Gavin Potter, who was about 10 years her senior, was assigned to, quote, arrive her properly to her life in the Sea Org. One of her tasks was to drive Gavin Potter home at night, and it was during those drives that he began to sexually abuse her, the lawsuit alleges. When she spoke up about it, she was faced with a grand choice. Would you like to be punished and go to the Sea Org's prison program, otherwise known as the RPF or Rehabilitation Project Force, possibly for years, or would you rather marry Gavin Potter? She felt she had no choice but to accept the latter, and then she was coerced to have sex with Potter after it was arranged by Scientology officials at the Manor Hotel, also known as the Hollywood Celebrity Center here in LA. She continued to live with their parents, but when she did have sexual intercourse with Potter, she alleges that she felt coerced. At 19, she became pregnant and then faced the Sea Org's policy against having children. She alleges that Potter asked her to have an abortion. Instead, she escaped the Sea Org, had her daughter, and then divorced Potter in 1997 when she was just 23. In parentheses here, 6 years later, in 2003, she was attacked by Danny Masterson at his Hollywood Hills home, a forcible rape he was convicted of on May 31st at a trial where he was also convicted of another 2003 rape in the form of Jane Doe 2, and she was also a Scientologist at the time. And as we know, Masterson is currently serving a life prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years. In the lawsuit she filed on December 29th under seal, Jane Doe 1 is suing Scientology for negligence because it, quote, failed to take reasonable steps or to implement reasonable safeguards to avoid acts of childhood sexual assault. She's suing Gavin Potter for childhood sexual abuse, child molestation, and sexual battery. And again, my friends, how much has this been coming up lately in the Scientology news? And I have a feeling there's a lot more to come. She's also suing the defendants for negligent supervision, negligent employment, and intentional infliction of emotional abuse. Now, Potter is a figure who's been somewhat controversial for years. In 2014, Mike Rinder at his blog noted that Potter was being hailed as a Scientologist who could, quote, close anyone on anything. And here's an excerpt from the flyer that's promoted to Scientologists to go to this event so you too can learn how to close anyone on anything, delivered by Mr. Gavin Potter. And he's a top Freewinds OT hatting speaker and lecturer, sales and recruitment trainer trained in LRH sales and closing tech, and by Les Danes. Now, we've discussed Gavin Potter quite a bit in the series, and again, in the aforementioned video that I'll link in the description box a couple of weeks ago. He, when I knew him, was married to a lovely, very empathic, the opposite of Gavin Potter, who seemed sociopathic to me. She was married to him at the time. If anybody happens to know where Alexandra Powers is, I'd really like to know. Is she still in the Sea Org? Did she get disappeared now? And did Gavin Potter get disappeared? Because often when suits like this come up, they just vanish and they're sent somewhere else. And when I was in the cult and this happened, there was always people disappearing. And what we were told was not ever what actually happened, but, oh, he just went off to so-and-so post, or, oh, she's getting ethics handling. But I've always wondered what happened to Alexandra, because she was slated to be a huge actor. She had quite a bit of credits. She had just finished doing the movie Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis, and then she gets whisked off into the Sea Org. She was married to Gavin Potter, like I said, and Alexandra, the wife of Gavin, was responsible for getting me on the Freewinds, which we discussed that nightmare on the series. So carrying on with this. But way back in 2000, Tori Chrisman, I'm sure you guys know who she is. She's an ex-Scientologist that's been very outspoken for many years. She was posting warnings in 2000 about Potter in ways that sound pretty prescient now. Gavin Potter is a Sea Org recruiter. If you hear that your child is even talking with him, I highly suggest you get your kid away from him. Gavin tells young children, ages 13 usually and on up, that the end of the world is coming and that their parents are going to starve to death, so they need to join the Sea Org to save the world. That sounds just like a doomsday cult scenario, right? The next hearing in the lawsuit is scheduled for August 1st in Los Angeles Superior Court. Okay, this is older news as we're covering the backstory of this. So in this new lawsuit filed by Jane Doe 1, this civil lawsuit, Scientology is being portrayed as an organization that covers up child abuse as part of its systems of internal control. The Church of Scientology International instructs its membership that the only answer to a crime being committed by its members, including rape, sexual abuse, or child abuse, is, of course, Scientology and the teachings of Hubbard, not law enforcement. If senior officials in the RTC Center, Church of Scientology International, Sea Org, or any other organization received credible evidence that child sexual abuse had occurred within the church, the officials covered up the incident rather than report the abuse to local authorities. Upon information and belief, in most instances, any alleged perpetrator of child abuse or sexual abuse was simply moved to a different Scientology base or location. That's what we talked about earlier. That's why I'm wondering where Alexandra might actually be right now. Sometimes the alleged perpetrator was sent to RPF. Other times, no action was taken. Victims, however, are blamed for, quote, pulling it in. They pull in the abuse upon themselves and are forced to either apologize to their abuser. They're forced to either apologize to their abuser for causing the assault or undergo a program to learn how they caused the assault. Again, see the Danny Masterson rape case when the Jane Does were made to do exactly that. Upon information and belief, and given the nature of the vast amount of information collected and recorded during auditing, it's highly likely that defendants have countless pieces of evidence describing child sexual abuse, both by perpetrators and the victims. Again, we interviewed top UK auditor Chris Malin, where he had to sit across from a pedophile, a ringleader of a network of pedophiles, and take time, place, form, and event as this guy got off explaining all these wonderful things. So if and when Scientology can ever be put on trial, all the pre-clear folders, all the folders that people like Chris would write down the information of these predators and sexual abuse that got covered up, all that would have to happen is the FBI would have to raid them, and all the information and all the incredible skeletons in Scientology's closet, which we've only seen a fraction of, it's all available right there anytime they want to jump in there. Carrying on. So The full lawsuit will be linked in the description box. And this is how Scientology has decided to handle it as of today. So Jane Doe, just recapping, Jane Doe 1's lawsuit alleges that after Potter abused her, she was given the choice either to go into the Sea Org's prison detail, the RPF, or to marry Potter. So she chose the latter, but alleges that any sexual contact she had with them subsequently over the years 1991 to 1997, she considered non-consensual. Stand by, friends, as I throw you over here in the chat. Always like to have you on the right-hand side here. Please feel free to ask questions or comments as we get towards the end here, and we'll answer them at the end. So she left the Sea Org, but not Scientology. And she was close friends with Lisa Marie Presley and more casually acquainted with Masterson. On May 31st, a jury found that Masterson raped Jane Doe number 1 in the early hours of April 25th, 2003. The jury also convicted him on another count, as we know, of forcible rape, and he was sentenced to life in prison on September 7th. Meanwhile, 4 of Masterson's victims and one of their husbands are currently suing Masterson and Scientology for the harassment that they said they experienced since coming forward to the LAPD in 2016 with the rape allegations. That civil suit has been on hold during the criminal trial, and it's known in court as Bixler versus Scientology. That's upcoming, and I'm sure that they'll try to, well, they have actually tried to do the same thing. Stand by. So when the Bixler lawsuit was filed in 2019, Scientology attempted to derail it, just like it's doing with this latest civil lawsuit from Jane Doe 1, by forcing it into their religious arbitration, saying that the women who were Scientologists at the time had signed contracts promising not to sue Scientology, but to bring any grievance to the church's own internal justice procedure. An appeals court, however, overruled that decision, saying that the things that the women were suing for in the Bixler suit, harassment, stalking, and even the poisoning of their pets, had occurred after they had left the church, and so the contracts no longer applied. Now, Scientology, of course, is trying the same strategy to derail Jane Doe 1's lawsuit, saying that they found a contract she signed in 2002 when she was 27, and that's what she's suing for. The abuse by Potter occurred before she signed that contract, and while she was still in the church, not after she had left, as in the other lawsuit. The new motion also contains some language attempting to counter her allegations. So this is what the cult says. Plaintiff alleges that a purported church agent, her fiancé and husband Gavin Potter, assaulted her while both were members of the Sea Org. The church defendants know these allegations are cynical falsehoods. Plaintiff's own contemporaneous writings show that she fell in love with and enthusiastically married Mr. Potter on the eve of turning 18 years old. But those allegations unquestionably fall within the scope of the dispute she agreed to arbitrate. Also, Scientology has asked the court to put the lawsuit on a stay until it can rule on the arbitration motion next year at a hearing scheduled for May 30th. A hearing to consider that motion for a stay is scheduled for October 27th. Previously, Scientology had told the court that the plaintiff had not served David Miscavige properly. Again, see the previous video to see what they had to do to try to serve the elf, and asked that he be removed from the case. So, keeping score, Scientology has gone to its usual playbook. 1, at all costs, leave David Miscavige out of it. 2, you can't sue us because you signed a contract agreeing to arbitration. 3, your allegations are nonsense anyways. Now, what the hell is Scientology's religious arbitration? So, to join the Church of Scientology, one has to sign a binding arbitration contract, which stipulates that any claims against the church have to be submitted to Scientology arbitration tribunals. I'm going to show you in a second how that's not too unusual. I know it sounds crazy probably, but there is a chance for them to actually invoke this. Now, in the Raising a Secret Society series, season 2, episode number 5, I believe, there's a video called The Bridge to Total Amnesia, Part 2. Again, I'll link it in the description box, in which I go over several of the contracts. I just want to play you a quick clip and give you a flavor for how incredible these are. Now, in the second legal monstrosity that an unwitting Scientologist is required to sign, one gives up the legal right to sue the Church of Scientology or to ever have a lawyer represent them in any dispute with Scientology. This contract memorializes my freely given consent to be bound exclusively by the discipline, faith, internal organization, and ecclesiastical rule, custom, and law of the Scientology religion in all matters relating to Scientology religious services. This means that I am forever abandoning, surrendering, waiving, and relinquishing my right to sue or otherwise seek legal recourse with respect to any dispute, claim, or controversy against the church. Okay, you can see right there. And again, I'll link the video in the description box so you can see how binding and atrocious these contracts really are. And often new people unwittingly sign these things because there's so much gobbledygook to go over. Right at the beginning, you basically sign your life away without really realizing it. And this is also how they subjected Lisa McPherson to her murder. I'll just go ahead and play the rest of these two, and then we'll jump into one thing I wanted to show you about, do they have a chance to actually use this religious arbitration, and what's the precedence of other religions in the past. Contract number 3 here strips you completely of your right to your PC folders. In connection with my participation in religious services, the church and all other Scientology churches and organizations in which I participate in such religious services may compile a folder or folders containing its notations of my spiritual progress, known as a pre-clear folder or PC folder, as well as other ecclesiastical files containing notations regarding my spiritual progress. I specifically acknowledge and agree that all of my PC folders and other ecclesiastical files containing notations regarding my spiritual progress, as well as the contents thereof, are the sole and exclusive property of Church of Scientology International. They are not mine, and I have no legal, ecclesiastical, or other rights whatsoever with respect to them. This final contract allows Scientology to legally imprison a parishioner. I want to give a trigger warning for this. This is kind of brutal. You can see so far already, just with these two contracts, you have no access to your PC folders. So that's what they're going to claim as to why you can't serve up the evidence of the alleged predatory aspects of Scientology. And you're getting a glimpse, just a minor glimpse, of how they're able to actually have their law within a law and get away with these crimes. This is what they invoked in the Lisa McPherson introspection rundown, which caused her negligent homicide. The Scientology religion teaches that the spirit can be saved, and that the spirit alone may save or heal the body, and the introspection rundown is intended to save the spirit. I understand that the introspection rundown is an intensive, rigorous religious service that includes being isolated from all sources of potential spiritual upset, including, but not limited to, family members, friends, or others with whom I might normally interact. As part of the introspection rundown, I specifically consent to church members being with me 24 hours a day at the discretion of my case supervisor, in accordance with the tenets and customs of the Scientology religion. The case supervisor will determine the time period in which I will remain isolated according to the beliefs and practices of the Scientology religion. I further specifically acknowledge that the duration of any such isolation is uncertain, determined only by my spiritual condition, but that such duration will be completely at the discretion of the case supervisor. Okay, so what chance do they have of actually invoking this, and what's been the precedence in the past? Again, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like an obvious way to simply skirt the law and keep it a law within Scientology, where they, of course, have the advantage, and the deck is stacked against the plaintiff in this case. But when you're dealing with religion, this is what quote can legally actually be invoked or happen. So we shall see if this works or not. Chrissy Carnell Bixler, the named plaintiff, and 2 other women in the lawsuit claimed that the church targeted them in retaliation for going public with their allegations against Masterson. They cited past instances where Scientologists had harassed their perceived foes and critics under the church's fair game policy. In court filings, the church denied any wrongdoing and claimed that L. Ron Hubbard, the movement's psychopathic founder, had suppressed fair game in 1968. As covered in previous videos, that's completely not true. What they did, my friends, is they say we don't use that for PR reasons anymore, but the actual policies carry on ruthlessly to this day. To quash the lawsuit, the church invoked legal agreements signed by the plaintiffs when they were members, in which they agreed to use religious arbitration instead of the civil legal process. The contracts vary slightly in language, but they contain two key provisions at the heart of the dispute. First, the plaintiffs gave up the right to sue or seek legal redress against the Church of Scientology in perpetuity. Again, you just saw that in a couple of the contracts that were read out. One of the plaintiffs signed an earlier and possibly more limited version of this waiver, while the other three signed later versions that cover the church itself, its satellite organizations, and its employees. Second, the plaintiffs agreed that the arbitrators themselves, quote, shall be Scientologists in good standing with the mother church, which could, I would say absolutely does, undermine the process's impartiality. You're damn right it does. In other words, once Scientology can get it into this religious arbitration, if they can, the plaintiff, the victim, is not going to receive any justice and is probably going to face ethics actions for daring to bring it to law enforcement. Religious arbitration isn't unique to Scientology. Some synagogues, for example, require new members to accept the jurisdiction of a rabbinical court for spiritual disputes. Christian denominations often have their own internal ecclesiastical processes, ranging from the Roman Catholic Church's system of canon law to the boards and panels used by Protestant churches for internal discipline. Islam's body of religious law, known as Sharia, plays a similar role in Muslim communities. While Scientology's use of religious arbitration may be more sweeping and aggressive, you're damn right it is, than in other faiths, it's legally similar enough that a coalition of religious groups sided with them in the lower court. So as you can see, this is a quote-unquote valid defense that Scientology is trying to invoke. In response, the plaintiffs urged the court to throw out the contracts. A California judge decided to do so and upheld the arbitration agreements. But the California Court of Appeals overturned the ruling on appeal in January. This is in regards, by the way, the civil lawsuit. I know it can be confusing because there's so many, that the Jane Does and one of the husbands of the Jane Doe, Cedric, are bringing forth in the upcoming civil trial. And as you can see, they tried to get that thrown into their arbitrary BS, I would suggest, as well. So the appeals court concluded that enforcing the contract would violate the plaintiffs' First Amendment rights to change their religious beliefs. Quote, in effect, Scientology suggests that one of the prices of joining its religions or obtaining a single religious service is eternal submission to a religious forum, a sub silencio waiver of petitioners' constitutional right to extricate themselves from the faith, the court wrote. The Constitution forbids a price that high. So I'll leave a link in the description box if you'd like to look into that further. It is interesting that this gives an example of how Scientology and other religious groups, I'm reminded of the Jehovah's Witnesses that were trying to bring forth sexual assault, and they were trying to get it forced into their religious arbitration. I remember this happened about a year or so ago when this kind of made the headlines. But you can see how religions protect themselves and are allowed sometimes to work their own law, and this is how they cover up all this stuff. What's the solution, guys? I'm not a lawyer. Like I said, I don't pretend to be. But somehow or another, it seems really unjust, and it seems like it's waiting for criminal actions, pedophiles, and sexual assault, and all sorts of bullshit to go on simply by having this protection that the religions have. And the rationale for that is, if you're going to do our rituals, if you're going to submit to our stuff, whether it's Scientology or the JWs or whatever, you can legally sign your rights away, as you just saw in those contracts. And the church says, hey, we're not responsible for what may happen during this religious, these rituals and stuff. It's just absolute madness from my point of view. But hey, that's the world we live in, and that's the laws until it changes. A few questions before we roll out of here. Much more to come later on. Amanda, how are you doing, my friend? I'm quite sure that Aaron or Tony mentioned that Gavin Potter showed up to intimidate Jane Doe during Danny Masterson's trial. Could be mistaken. Are you sure about that? He would seem like somebody that would not be there because of this pending suit. So if that's true, Amanda, or if you have any more information, I'd like to know. But man, that would be very, very risky. But then again, that would be a maneuver to try to intimidate her because she knew him, quote unquote, very well. Thanks for that information, Amanda. Lady, how are you doing, my friend? Question: did Scientology not break the contract by not delivering what they promised? Is that a joke, a little joke this morning, lady, or is that a real question? Let me see. Did Scientology not break the contract by not delivering what they promised? Not quite sure exactly what you mean. I know your snarky sense of humor. You're one clever one. If that's a serious question, lady, can you give me more details after this video publishes? Leave it in the comments and I'll answer it. It's good to see you, my friend. One more before we roll out. Ciao, how are you doing? Just sending love from the Bahamas on my birthday trip. Man, you get out a lot. Chow just recently went to a cruise ship, and she sent me over some amazing photos where she was docked right next to the infamous free winds that we're talking about, in which Alexandra Powers, Gavin's wife, would recruit to get people like me to go take their courses on the free winds. And Gavin Potter, the husband of Alexandra, had a different position. But I think me and Chow are going to get together as soon as we have a chance to show you the dilapidated condition of the free winds today, and hear her very interesting stories as she talked with various people on her ship of fun, while the miserable people on the free winds were not having a very good time. Like I said, my friends, much more to come. This is just a short video to bring you up to date on the latest bullshit that Scientology is trying to do to keep their criminal activities under wrap. Please like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on the other side.
Hard physical labor and intense ideological study are used to break the subject's will, or is that the case?